This is the TSG Multimedia podcast for May of 2021. We're sponsored this month by Soundtraxx, Automatic, and the TSG Train Crew on Patreon. Thank you very much. I'm your host, John Abaticola. I have some updates from last month, the Soundtraxx Soundbyte with George Bogatiuk, information about upcoming programs, some responses to viewer comments, and some great photos in our Catch of the Month segment. Now, before we get to all that, please remember to hit the thumbs up icon to register your support of what you're watching. Leaving a comment in the comment section below also helps me know if you like what you see on the channel here. Did you know you can help support my work on this channel by becoming part of the TSG Train Crew? That's what I call our supporters on Patreon. It's as cheap as 7 cents a day, and it helps bring the content you enjoy to the channel. Another way to support the channel is to click on the branded merchandise just below the video player on your computer screen and get yourself a t-shirt or a mug, a phone case, or whatever else strikes your fancy. So, let's go to our Soundtraxx Soundbyte for this month. Okay, so I have George dialed up once again. Hey George, what's up?
Hey, John, not much. Well, actually, I should rephrase that. We have a lot that's up this month. I know over the past several videos, you've talked to Nancy and you've talked to me, and we've kind of alluded to some products we have coming out. And I'm really excited to say that we're going to get these on the machines here within the next week. So make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter. We do have the Next 18 decoder, which is one we've been teasing for a while. I actually have a sample here in front of me. You can actually see this Next 18 and how small it is on my hand.
Yeah.
And the advantage is that it just uses this little connector right here, and it literally just snaps into the decoder inside your or the motherboard inside your model. So we're really excited to get these on the machines and ready to start shipping. I happen to have in front of me one of Walther's Proto 2000 SW. I think it's a 1200 or something like that. But you can kind of see where that decoder would snap in right there. It even says decoder on the motherboard.
Right, and it even has it drawn out, so you know which direction.
It even has it drawn out, because that's one of the challenges with the Next 18 is it's not keyed. The 21 pin decoders that are out there are keyed. They can only fit in one way. And so this one can't, or this one isn't. So I could actually plug it in either way, but so it's good that they actually drew that out on the motherboard. Yeah. But this decoder simply just snaps into place just like that.
And look how small it is.
Yeah, this is an HO model. I know the Next 18 is used in a lot of the N-scale versions that are, or N-scale models that are out there. And so we're really excited about this because it gives N-scalers good quality Tsunami 2 sound. Model Railroaders Reader's Choice Award winner 2 times for favorite sound decoder. So we're really excited to be able to offer this as an option for our N-scalers. And so this decoder literally just snaps into place. Now on this motherboard, you will notice there are some 2-pin connectors located around. So if you buy a non-sound version, you will not have a plug for the speaker. So the good news is I tested this. Our current keeper plug will plug right into these 2-pin connectors. So when you put your cube speaker here in the housing that Walthers provides, you can then wire it to our 2-pin connector and then just simply plug it into these connectors. Cool. Now I can't speak to all of the brands that use these use the Next 18, but I know that this particular one does use our current keeper connector as a 2-pin plug-in.
Very cool. I'm excited about that because I just recently did an install of the KN1, which by the way is a great little kit. I mean, that's the decoder, the speaker, the wires, the Kapton tape, the LEDs, everything that you would need, and even speaker baffles, which I thought was really cool. It's the smallest speaker I think I've seen, and it doesn't sound like a small speaker at all.
No.
But that video is going to come out this month. It's part 1 of the long distance Amtrak train that I'm building. And I'm very excited to be able to get my hands on one of these Next 18 decoders, because the other P42 that I'm going to put on that long distance train, I have the new Next 18 adapter boards from What Are Vehicles and Details. That's my friend Alvin Ho. I don't know if you know him. He lives out here in the Bay Area. And It's kind of like a decoder buddy, but for N scale.
Okay.
And I'm excited because I'll probably be able to just plug that new Soundtraxx decoder right into it. And they'll both be Soundtraxx decoders in Kato locomotives, which means it'll be easier for me theoretically to speed match, and they should behave very similarly because they're both Soundtraxx products. I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, that should give you great sound. And what's really cool about our decoders, one of the things you talk about the Amtrak, you're going to have two locomotives, I'm assuming, running nose to tail. Well, here's
Yeah.
a little trivia question for you. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Uh-oh. I hope I know.
Uh,
Geez.
so I'm sure you've heard of head end power, HEP.
Okay, yeah,
You
of
know what
course.
that is?
Yeah,
Okay,
it powers all the stuff in the train.
correct. It
In
powers
the
all the
passenger
passenger
cars.
trains.
Yeah.
Correct. So it's the electrical generation for the electricity for the
Yeah.
power, lights, air conditioning, whatever.
Right. We have those
If
on
you
our
have
Caltrain F40s.
yes. Now, if you have two locomotives, which one's going to have the HEP?
I never thought about that before, but if I had to guess, let me guess.
Mm-hmm.
I would guess it would be the second one because it's closer to the train set and they wouldn't want to run the cables all the way up to the first one.
You're partially correct. You're going to be in the rear unit, but the reason it's in the second unit is because when those HEP power prime movers are running, they're running up artificially. So our GE decoder will run at notch 6, and it will stay at notch 6 when HEP is enabled. Well, if you're sitting in the cab of a locomotive that diesel engine is notched up quite a bit, it becomes loud. The engine's shaking quite a bit, and it becomes
Sure.
somewhat uncomfortable. So they'll actually do it in the second unit because then they can have it off of their unit so they get a comfortable ride, and
Mm-hmm.
then they will have the HEP powered on the second unit. So this is a really fun fact for you. So that way, when you build your consist to run it, you can turn on function 16, which is our head end power, on the trailing unit only. So the lead unit ignores that command. You'll hear the HEP kick up on the second unit.
That's really cool. That's one of those things. And I want to say, I was kind of proud of myself, George.
Mm-hmm.
All I needed help with on that install, I don't know if you remember, but I called you just to ask you because JMRI did not recognize the KN1. It's just not part of JMRI yet. So I didn't know which decoder to select, and it doesn't really say anywhere. So I did have to call you for that. But did you notice I did not need any help with anything else? I figured out, and I want to mention this because I know that people need to read the manual. This is coming from me, okay? If I can do it, anybody can do it because I am not good with written instructions. I really am not. That's part of the reason why I drove all the way to Sacramento for George to set up an Amtrak locomotive in HO to get the ditch lights and all that right. I mean, it was an excuse to hang out, and it was nice to have you on the video, but really, I just didn't want to go through all the trouble to figure out how to do it. I feel stupid admitting that right now, but I mean, it was good though. Like I said, it was an excuse to hang out, but I did it with this KN1. I set up my ditch lights. I made them independent. I went in, I changed what needed to be. I can't remember what it was now because I just did it once and that was it. But it did exactly what I wanted it to do, and it looks great. So it wasn't that hard. Yeah, it wasn't that hard, Pro tip to all the people out there: read the manual. It's not that hard.
No, and to kind of build on that, we try to make our decoders easy to use so that our user's guide written out in English terms, so you can see the feature, and we explain what the feature is, how it works. That we discuss how to adjust the CV, even though we're not talking about the bits. We're giving you plus this for this feature, plus this for this feature, and so forth. So it's really easy if you just walk your way through, take your time, and have the confidence. You cannot break our decoder by changing a CV value. You might get some strange behavior, but you didn't break it. So you can always reset the decoder and start over.
Right, exactly. And that was one of the things I kept thinking. It can't be that difficult. I'm only adjusting two things, two ditch lights. That's it. Everything else stayed the same. I mean, I did have to pick the horn that I wanted, which was really easy. I just manually changed the CV using JMRI, put it back into test mode, hit the horn, like, oh, that one sounds good. So the one thing I am curious about though, and we have talked about this sort of off camera in the past, but I'm going to ask you about it now because one of the things I'm concerned about is having the same sound set, right? Because the decoder is going to have the same sound set. in both locomotives, because what I'm
Hmm.
thinking is that all it's going to do is give me two of the same sounds coming out. But you've told me in the past that there's some kind of a pitch shift or something like that that I can
Hmm.
apply to one of them so that they
Right.
don't sound like that. Maybe talk
Right. You
about
can.
that for a minute because I'll need to know that later.
Sure, absolutely. So in the decoder, we have a lot of audio tools that are just like what you would have in a studio. We have
Mm-hmm.
the 7 band equalizer, we have the reverb and echo that you can add into it, and then we have what you talked about, the prime mover pitch shift. And what that does is it takes the prime mover and shifts the pitch just slightly up or down depending on what you're wanting to do. So with all these tools, you could have two locomotives with the exact same sound profiles listed, but if you make minor adjustments to the equalizer settings, your reverb settings, and your pitch shift, they can sound with the same flavor but sound completely different. So I
Right.
actually have this locomotive here really quick. I can show you just if you want to hear the pitch shift. So I'm going to unmute. You hear the prime mover sound, correct?
Uh huh.
So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the pitch and I'm going to shift it all the way down so it's the most drastic.
Okay.
So I'm going to lean in again so you can hear it on the microphone. You can hear the prime mover, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, now listen closely.
Oh, yeah.
So what you're doing is you're just shifting the pitch of that prime mover. So you can still have that feel of the 567, but now you can shift that around. So just like you said, you can have two locomotives with the same sound profile, which would be prototypically correct.
Mm-hmm.
And then using the audio tools, you can simulate slight differences in tone. Because here's the reality. I mean, if you think back to movies in the 1950s, for example, what did they use for lightning? They didn't go out and record or lightning, thunder, whatever. They didn't go
Right.
out and
Thunder.
record thunder. They would hit a big sheet of metal.
Right. And then slow it
And
down.
right.
Yeah.
So what I could do is I could actually come over here to the real locomotive and put a microphone here, or I could put a microphone here or a microphone here, and I'd get three different recordings of the same locomotive, and
Mm-hmm.
then pitch it, pawn it off to you as three different recordings. Well, this is three different recordings, but the location of the microphone slightly varied, and that's what caused the variation. Because I was
Mm-hmm.
talking to a friend of mine years and years ago, and he was telling me that. Let me rephrase that. I was talking to him a couple of years ago. He worked on Santa Fe Railroad years and years ago, and he was telling me, George, I've tried. A Jeep 7 sounds like a Jeep 7 sounds like a Jeep 7. I cannot hear the difference between no matter which locomotive I'm on because they're all the same prime mover, the same exhaust stacks, everything is the same.
Yeah.
And so to your topic there, there's a certain apprehend or a certain what's the word I want to use a certain perception that every locomotive sounds a little bit different. And does it really, or is it because our perspective of the locomotive changes where we're standing in relation to the locomotive that we can hear some nuances, or are we talking ourselves into hearing those nuances?
Well, that's a
And
good
these are
point,
the things.
actually. Yeah.
And these are the things. So, so when I get my locomotives, I, set my volume levels where I want them. But then every single one of them, I go in and I do the equalizer live. I don't use preset settings on the equalizer and the reverb and the pitch shift because then that way I can make them all sound a little bit differently. Because let's say today I got water in my ears for some reason, and okay, well, all right, now it sounds different. Now I put this one next to the other one and they don't sound exactly the same. So it kind of
Right.
gives you that feeling without having to spend hours in front of a computer searching through pages and pages of alleged profile differences only to get you know, the
Right.
same thing that you can just make a couple of CV adjustments.
Also to your point about, if you're standing in front of, I'll just use my example of a long distance Amtrak train. You
Mm-hmm.
can only be standing in front of one of the locomotives at a time. So the
Mm-hmm.
other one may sound different simply because it's 40 feet away or 50 feet away. And
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't scale down because your models on N scale are only
Mm-hmm.
this far, they're this far apart. So you're hearing,
Right.
so I didn't really think of it that way, but I think that you raise a really good point.
Yeah, and so it gives you and that's part of the reason why we put all those tools in there was to give you the flexibility to make them sound best to your ears.
Right.
One of our retail stores had told me that one of our competitors goes in and pre-equalizes the sound. Well, that's what sounded good to him or her, but what sounds good to you may be different. And so that's where you get that perception. And who knows, they may be using the equalizer and those tools prior to the studio mixing to, sell it as a whole different prime mover.
It could, I mean, you could do that theoretically. It wouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
hard to. One thing I will say is that I like the option to do it afterwards, because if it's EQ'd by somebody else elsewhere, besides the fact that they may have a different concept of what sounds good, they're probably also using a different speaker setup. And
Mm-hmm.
every install is likely to have a different speaker and a different enclosure and all these differences. It's better, I think, to be able to change those settings to suit your specific model. I think that's giving people the opportunity to customize where it may not exist otherwise. So that it is a good feature for a number of reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. So one other thing I'll bring up really quickly before we end the segment here, you mentioned that Minikube speaker and how great it sounds.
Oh yeah,
Well, we also just started shipping those.
I saw that. I
So,
got the email that was showing the 3 different speakers. Yeah.
yep. So part number 810162, these are in retail stores now, or you can order on our website at soundtraxx.com, but we do encourage you to go to the retailers as well.
Yeah, definitely. And they do sound especially good. The trick though, and I think in case people don't know this, and this is another pro tip, I feel stupid giving pro tips because I don't consider myself a pro, but I have some experience with the DCC installs and that kind of things. I've done a number of them. But the tip that I want to give people, and you can tell me, kill me if I'm wrong here, George, but always use some kind of a sealant around the enclosure and the speaker where they meet. Because if you don't have an airtight fit, it won't sound as good. And the secret to making those tiny speakers like that sound good is that airtight fit. Because I got to tell you, when I put that one into my P42, I did not use the deepest enclosure. It wouldn't fit without milling the frame. So I
Mm-hmm.
actually used one of the shallowest ones. I think it was like the second or third one, depth wise. I was
Mm-hmm.
just being really conservative. I didn't want to put it all together and then be like, oh shoot, the thing doesn't fit and have to take it all apart. And I'm too lame to measure. I know you can measure too. I'm just too lame to do that, or too lazy, whatever you want to call it. So I used the second to shallowest one or third to shallowest one, and it sounds big. I mean, it sounds like an HO scale model to me. That's how good it sounds. So they're legit. That's
Yeah,
all I'm going to say about it.
the first time we saw them was last fall. We sat around when this is when we were talking about the KN1,
Mhm.
and engineering team came in and said, "Look, we found this speaker." And we looked at it and was like, "Okay, we'll see." And he put it on the track and listened to it. And I was like, sell them now."
Right? Yeah. I
So,
mean, because the only other option that I'm aware of, I don't know any other place where you can get, what is it, 9 by 13 or something, or 7 by 13. It's some odd size like that. The
mhm,
only other speakers that I've found that I can fit into N scale models without not a lot of trouble is an 8 by 12. It's a
mhm,
slightly different shape than the one that came with the KN1.
mhm,
And I mean, those also sound really good with an enclosure. But that little one that came with the KN1, that came with the enclosure that you guys sent me, sounds
mhm.
just as good as the 8 by 12, which is a little bit bigger. So it's a very impressive speaker. I don't know where you found those things, but they're really cool.
Where it's our secret. You can
Right.
find them at soundtraxx.com or your local retailer today.
Right. And if you order online, you can get free shipping, I think, right?
That is
Still.
correct. We are still
Yeah.
doing TSG free. We'll get you free
Okay.
shipping on domestic orders at soundtraxx.com.
Very cool. Yeah. I mean, that's especially good if you have a small order, because, shipping can be as much as you're ordering the whatever the part is, right?
Exactly.
True story. So, do you have anything else like a modeling tip? I know we talked about doing a modeling tip this month.
Sure, we can do a modeling tip. Now, this actually came up from a question I had with a customer this week. And the question was, can I combine using LEDs and light bulbs on the same locomotive? So in other words, if I'm doing an installation in a model that has 1.5-volt headlights, can I add LED truck lights or step lights or whatever else? And the answer is yes. You can combine any combination of those lights on your model. So the biggest thing is just remember to pay attention to the hard wiring diagrams that we offer on our tech tips or in the installation guide. and follow the respective diagrams for each light. So like say, for example, if your headlight and backup light are 1.5 volt light bulbs, wire them up according to the 1.5 volt diagrams that you have. If you're adding class lights, for example, like I did here with LEDs, you can actually wire them up to the FX3, and then with your resistor to the function common on the end with the resistor, just like you would for a traditional LED. So you can use any combination thereof in your model. So decide what your lighting device is going to be, how you're going to use it, and go for that installation and just follow it. So you can have any combination. If you wanted 14 volt bulbs for your headlight, great. 1.5 volt bulbs for your backup light, great. LEDs for your class lights or truck lights, great. All of those above can be installed on the same decoder. Just have to pay attention to when you're installing each of those lighting devices that you follow the respective wiring diagrams. Now, as a little side note here, on our Soundtraxx YouTube channel, this GP7 here, I've actually got a step-by-step tutorial on how I added the class lights on the front and the rear, and then the truck lights down underneath. I've got a step-by-step tutorial on our YouTube channel that will show you how to do that. Now, in this particular case, I only used clear or white class lights because in 1978, everything was run as an extra. And so green class lights wouldn't be used. So those were, I took those out and just didn't do it. But if I was doing this with green class lights, I would drill my first hole for the lens, and then on the back inside of the shell, I would drill very, very slightly just to indent into the plastic a little bit bigger hole. Then you can mount the white LED and the green LED side by side behind that lens, just like this, and then wire them up to the two different function outputs. And as a way to show you this, we do have a video coming where we install a TSU PNP 8 into a Scale Trains SD45 that uses all three color class lights for clear, red, and green. And it talks about the difference of how each of those would be displayed. So be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and you'll be notified when we post that one.
Yeah, I remember when I was doing the install into the F59 PHI that I just alluded to earlier in this segment, I was using bulbs because I wanted to upgrade to LEDs at the time, but the video I was making was not about upgrading to LEDs. It was about installing a DCC decoder. And I remember having to use that. It was that one pad on the side of the decoder that all of those went to because they were incandescents and not LEDs. Well, I thank you. Thanks again to Soundtraxx too for helping support the work that I do here. It's greatly appreciated. And it's always good to see you. It's weird because we talk to each other, I don't know, once a month, but whenever I talk to you, I feel like I just talked to you last week,
Yeah.
I guess sometimes I do, like I called that one time to get the help just to figure out which decoder to pick in JMRI, but I don't know. It's weird. There's not a lot of people that you meet in life where you just feel like it was yesterday when you talk, no matter how long it's been. And it's right. Fun to talk to you for that reason.
Absolutely. So, that's what friends will do.
Yeah. That's why I drove to Sacramento as an excuse to hang out when really I had a couple of reasons, but it worked out for the best no matter what.
It was a fun day. We had a good time, and I even got delayed flights, so we had a little more time to spend.
Right. We got to see that one guy's two layouts. Remember the guy that does the HO scale layout with all the non-DCC stuff, but it still has all the animations. That was pretty cool.
Oh, that was cool. That was a fantastic layout. Just upgrade him to DCC and sound, and he'll be good.
Yeah, he could be the next big Soundtraxx customer.
There you go. I like it.
All right, George. Thanks, man. I'll talk to you next month, right?
All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, George. I appreciate the model tips. I also appreciate that Soundtraxx is offering the free shipping code for all of our viewers. So when you place an order at soundtraxx.com, use the code TSGFREE to get free shipping. And if you prefer to patronize your local brick and mortar shops, that's fine. You can still drop Soundtraxx a line and let them know that you appreciate their support of my work on this channel. So before I get to last month's activities, I want to remind you that our affiliate link to Great US Beef Jerky is active and you can find it in the description below. If you use the code TSG10 at checkout, You'll also get 10% off your order. So let's talk about what happened since I last came to you with a podcast. On April the 4th, I went to see Jack Burgess so that we could record the next episode of Model Railroading with Jack Burgess, and that's the one that came out a week ago. In this episode, Jack talked about his approach to weathering railroad equipment, and he gave some examples of prototype photos as well as operational information from the prototype that helped him determine the best approaches for weathering the models on his layout. If you didn't get to see it, that video is definitely worth checking out because he goes into pretty good detail about how he decided which weathering would be appropriate for which pieces of equipment based on the time when they started being used for different things. So on the 5th, I finally got my first COVID vaccine shot. Now, this really is no one's business, but I'm mentioning it because it's relevant to my ability to get out and do the same kind of productions that I was doing before this pandemic hit. The way I figure, by the middle part of this month, or a little after the middle part, I'll be able to get back out and do more of that kind of production. And I have to tell you, that's something that has been a long time coming, and I've really been looking forward to it. On April 9th, I had a video meeting with a guy named Scott McGee. Scott is the general manager for the Yosemite Mountain Sugar Pine Railroad, and our meeting was set up to record his presentation for the PCR's annual convention. I told you about this convention last month. Do you remember? It was called the Sugar Pine Centennial, and it was supposed to be held in person in Fresno, but it ended up being virtual due to COVID concerns. We had some of the organizers on live streams last month to give the convention the publicity that it deserved. And as I mentioned, it was changed from in-person to virtual about 8 or 9 weeks ago. We put on a video conference unlike any I've seen, where the attendees were able to have as much social interaction as possible, despite it being held on a virtual platform. Almost like being at an in-person convention, but it wasn't. I'll talk about that in a minute. I want to get back to Scott's presentation real quick. It was all about the history of the railroad that eventually became the Yosemite Mountain Sugar Pine Railroad that we know today. I think it's always interesting to hear about the historical aspects of these railroads. And also, I think it's important to recognize the role that railroads have played in the development of not only the country as a whole, but also the regions and local areas where people live today. That's why this channel has historic preservation as one of its 3 key goals. So anyway, I'm planning to get out to the Yosemite Mountain Sugar Pine Railroad sometime in the near future so that I can highlight their operation for you here on the channel. Maybe we'll even bring back the annual Steam Special for that. I'm not really sure because I don't know when I'll be able to get out there. So we'll see, but I did want to mention that because I'm interested in getting out there. It's one of the places I haven't been to yet. On the 11th, we had a special edition TSG Live Crew Lounge to talk about the PCR convention that I just mentioned a minute ago. And then on the 12th, I recorded another presentation for that convention. This one was with Mike Osborne, who's a 42-year veteran of the Southern Pacific and then Union Pacific Railroads. Mike's presentation was the keynote address for the convention, and I got to tell you, he had some really good stories. On the 14th, our friend Dave, also known as Sparky107107, returned to his normal Wednesday night time slot for a live stream on his channel. It was really nice to see him doing his live show again. It sounds like he misses doing it, so I won't be surprised if he comes back as soon as his work schedule allows it. On the 17th, Silicon Valley Lines had their second virtual open house. I signed up early so that I could get to run a train on their layout from my house using the tech that they've developed for this kind of event. It didn't really last very long. It's kind of a short run, maybe 15 minutes, but it was fun all the same. And in case I haven't mentioned it before, I'll say it now. I think what they've done at Silicon Valley Lines is really cool. To be able to have a virtual open house and a virtual operating session, as they do, is something that I think will help them expand their reach. And what it really does that's more important is it makes the hobby more accessible to people who are unable to participate due to distance or mobility or whatever. So good on you, Silicon Valley Lions, for expanding the accessibility of this hobby for anyone who might be interested in it. We need more of that, I think. On the 21st, we had our monthly call-in talk show. This live stream featured the return of my regular co-host, Michelle Kempema. We had a segment about the PCR convention that I've been talking about this whole time because it was due to happen on that very next Saturday. And then we went on to talk about our general conversation topic, which was, what do you like about trains? I think it sounds like a simple and maybe even a stupid question, but there's a lot to consider if you really think about it. Anyway, on the 24th, the Sugar Pine Centennial took place. This was the culmination of about 7 or 8 weeks of organization, education, and tons of practice, and a lot of people going outside their normal comfort zones. I didn't mention the multiple video conferences and practice sessions that we held leading up to that event that also took place during the month, but we had somewhere between 30 and 40 people involved in its planning and execution, and it went off very well. Feedback from most participants was very positive, and I'm really proud actually of what we were able to do. There were volunteers whose level of tech savviness really wasn't ideal for this kind of event, but they did an amazing job pulling it off. These were some of the best volunteers that I think I've ever seen, because a pretty complicated live production came off with very few hitches, and the work that we all put in gave us a lot of really valuable information that we need to present an even better national convention this coming July. So I'm sure that we'll be talking about that here on the channel as that convention approaches. It's being held in the first week of July. The upcoming months will be jam-packed, I'm sure, with planning and pre-production tasks for that event. What we learned last weekend in the PCR convention will ensure that the national convention is going to be remembered as probably the best train-related virtual convention that got pulled off during the pandemic. The great pandemic of 2020 and 2021. Anyway, on April 25th, we had our regularly scheduled episode of the TSG Live Crew Lounge. I was joined by 5 guys with an average age of only 21 to talk about young people in the hobbies of model railroading, rail fanning, and historic preservation. It was eye-opening in some ways, as the responses to some of the topics that we discussed were not entirely what I expected to hear. This one is definitely worth checking out on the replay when you have time. And now for some of the comments and questions from last month. Our first question or comment comes from a how-to video I did about 3 years ago when I installed a Tsunami 2 decoder into an HO scale Amtrak F59 PHI locomotive. It's kind of funny that this came up because I was just mentioning that project during our Soundtraxx Soundbyte with George earlier. Anyway, near the start of the video, I stated that I was considering changing all the wires in the model that were black to their correct NMRA standard colors based on which functions they control. Because all the wires in this locomotive were black. And I thought it was a good idea. Well, later in the video, I made the decision not to do that, and I explained why. Well, a highly astute viewer was angry and wrote that it was a bad how-to video because I said I was going to do something and then I didn't do it. My response to this comment is simply a correction and a question of my own. The correction is that I said I wanted to change the wires out. When I realized that I didn't have the colors I needed to do it right, I decided not to change them. Part of what went into that decision was that I figured eventually I'll swap out the bulbs that the model came with, because it's an older Athearn release, with LEDs. And that would be just as good of a time to use the correct color codes, because I'm likely to also have to add resistors to the wiring as well. And I explained all of this in the video. So my question for the critic was, did you watch the whole video? In the end, the project was completed satisfactorily, and it fulfilled the goals that I set forth at the beginning of the program. So I'm a little baffled by comments like that. Anyway, quite often I get comments from people who are asking questions that are very clearly answered in whatever video they're placing the comments under. And all I can figure is that they're watching and typing in the question before the answer shows up on the video. I don't really know. I mean, that's it, right? You type in the question before the answer shows up on the video and then you forget to delete the comment. I don't know. What do you think? That's all I can figure. Anyway, the next comment comes from the Ken Wiley, who commented on a product spotlight. Maybe we could get a comparison photo of the prototype. He also wanted to know the pulling power of the locomotive. Ken, a product spotlight is intended to show prospective shoppers what they get out of the box. It's not intended to be an exercise in criticism. I like the idea of using prototype photos. That is really good, especially for models that are very, very accurate, that I want to harp on how good they are. But it's poor form to use a photo without the photographer's permission, and I won't do that. So I will say, though, that it's easy for anyone who wants to see a prototype photo to simply type the unit number and the road name of just about any piece of railroad equipment into an internet search engine, and chances are very good, almost guaranteed, that you'll get to see a photo of that exact piece of equipment. So it just takes a little bit of extra effort on the viewer's part to do that. Late Night Model Railroad writes on the same product spotlight, I lost count of how many times you were impressed with the detail. And he continues, your reviews have convinced me to purchase a model once already. We will see if this ends up being another one of them. By the way, this guy looks suspiciously like Joey, so I'm guessing he must have changed his YouTube name. All I'm going to say about that is, for one, my reactions are genuine. When I'm recording for product spotlights, it's legitimately the first time I'm scrutinizing the model on the bench. Like, I've never seen it before. I just pulled it out of the box. So being my own worst critic, I've often looked back at a video as I'm editing it and thought to myself that I need to come up with more adjectives so that I'm not always saying the same thing. I'm going to cut myself a break on that, though, because when I look at anything that I think is really well done, I almost always use the word nice. It's just what comes out. So thanks for the comment and the compliment, though, because I think of it as a compliment if you bought something because you saw it on the channel. Anyway, the final comment comes from the Model Railroading 101 video I put out a couple months ago about basic weathering techniques. SOU 6900 says, quote, something I'd like to try, but at the same time, don't really have the patience to do, unquote. I totally get it. I didn't have time either. I had intended to put that video out for months before I finally got around to doing it. That being the case, though, I have to say that I'm glad I finally made time to do it. Something about using acrylic washes, weathering powders, and colored pencils is that there's practically no waiting time between each step, or I should say very little waiting time. I think the longest time I had to wait was after spraying the model with the dull coat. You could do one of these weathering jobs in well under an hour. The nice thing about weathering is that you decide when enough is enough, and if it looks good enough to your eye, there's no reason to keep going. I encourage anyone who's been thinking about trying out weathering to go watch the video and just see what I did, how I did it, and then try it. I ended up enjoying the process a lot, and I actually found it pretty relaxing, to be honest. I'm not sure if that makes any sense, but it's true. I really did enjoy it, and I want to have more time to do more. That's how much I liked it. I want to take a second to remind you that a lot of the tourist railroads are starting to open up a bit now that the COVID vaccine is becoming more widely administered. And also to please take a minute and go to your favorite tourist railroad's website to find out what kind of things they're doing. These organizations have been particularly hard hit by the pandemic, and they've lost more than a whole year of revenue. They had no choice but to remain closed, so it wasn't their fault. So we need to do what we can to support them now that they're able to open back up again. Now for this month's program schedule. As usual, all programs are scheduled to come out at 9 a.m. Pacific time, except where noted. I'm still working on the Product Spotlight and N-Scale Friday schedule, so those will get added in when I have something to share with you. On May 8th, so next Saturday, we have TSG Classics, Steamfest 2007 on the Niles Canyon Railway. This is an edited version of the DVD by the same name, Steamfest 2007, that documents the Steamfest event from that year. On May 15th, I have a special how-to video coming out. It demonstrates how I replaced an old Digitrax decoder in one of my N-scale Kato P42s with a shiny new Soundtraxx TSU KN1 decoder. It's part of a 3-part series that will detail how I'm changing my N-scale long-distance Amtrak train into a centerpiece for my N-scale collection. On May 19th, it's our monthly live call-in show I co-host with Michelle Kempema. I think Michelle wants to talk about all the great summer rail activities happening in the coming months.
On May 22nd, it's TSG Live Model Railroading. In this episode, my friend Mike Roquet will give his clinic about understanding railroad signals.
On Sunday, May 30th at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, we have the next episode of the TSG Live Crew Lounge panel discussion. We'll be talking about JMRI this month. What is it? Where did it come from? How can it enhance your model railroad experience? You know, that kind of thing. And now for the catches of the month. Our first catch comes from Sean Koga, who's in the process of rebuilding an EMD E6. It's HO scale. He said he's going to remotor it, add LEDs, and install a Tsunami 2 decoder in it. Good job, Sean. The next catch comes from Brandon Bader, who's out working. Looks like he had some official police business at Fowler Junction in Athens, Georgia. Heading west for the next one, Alvin Gilbert caught this grain train leaving west out of the North Yard in Salt Lake City. In this shot, the Chevron local is departing North Yard in Salt Lake City on its way to Roper Yard. Also from Alvin, a westbound grain train rumbles through Echo, Utah on January 18th, 2021.
This is a shot from the inside of a McKean car at the Nevada State Railroad Museum. And here we see number 25, an American locomotive, also at that museum.
Thanks to everyone who shared this month. If you have a photo you'd like to share, please email it to podcast@tsgmultimedia.com. Be sure you own the photo and let me know the what's, whens, and wheres of the shots you want to share. All right, that's all I have for you this month. I want to take a moment to acknowledge our excellent Patreon supporters. You see them in the credits every month, and I thought it would be appropriate to thank all of you for your generous support and, in many cases, your friendship.
That's it for now, and I'll see you soon.